It is one of those things that like finances and financial security, it affects our sense of safety and security. And so if we're in a constant state of worrying about our finances and we're constantly in that sort of sympathetic chronic activation, that chronic physiological stress response, or if we look at it from the yoga perspective, right, that really affects our sense of security and safety in our root chakra, that base energy center. And so if we are in that energy center and in that state of fear and survival and scarcity, right, it's going to be really hard to address some of the other aspects.
Welcome to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast. I'm your host, Nate Crannell, joined today by Dr. Sheetal Ajmani. Dr. Ajmani is a physician, best-selling author, host of the Essential Care Self-Care podcast, and founder of Radiant Living Institute, where she guides people to get unstuck and learn to live radiantly again. I love that saying. Her unique approach combines the principles and tools of Ayurveda, yoga, mindfulness, positive psychology, and science. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ajmani.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful being here. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Absolutely. What's going well today?
Oh, goodness. I don't know, so much. It just feels like a really nice day, even though it is cloudy and rainy here where I am on the East Coast. It still feels kind of sunny inside. I know that might sound like I'm giving away my sort of hopeless optimism, which is my genuine nature here. But yeah, overall, just having a really nice day. So,
do you, you're all about mindfulness and peace and calm. Like, do you let the weather kind of dictate your mood for the day, or are you just always sunshine?
I don't let it dictate my day in a negative way, I could say. And we were chatting a little bit before we started recording here about this thing called Ayurveda. And I'm going to mention that while I answer this question, because I love all the seasons, and I love all of the different weather climates, even the cold, which is not my favorite, but I feel like it all serves a purpose. It all gives us a reminder, those rainy days are just feel so cozy to me in a way. And then also there's something about the rain and the water that just feels so cleansing and nourishing, and then sunshine, it's you just want to kind of get out there and do stuff,
Absolutely.
So I feel like there's something to each season and there's something to learn from each season. And the reason I mentioned that has something to do with Ayurveda is because Ayurveda is the ancient medical system of India, and it really sees that each season does have a specific energy to it. Each season has a specific qualities to it, and that we as humans are intimately connected with nature, and that we're affected by those qualities within nature as well. And so, Ayurveda gives us frameworks for navigating different seasons of the year, the physical seasons of the year, but also different seasons of our life. And so honestly, it's been through my experience of different phases and seasons of my own life, right? My own journey, kind of the winters of my journey, as well as the summers and the springs and the sunshine, right? And taking what I've learned about Ayurveda and seasonal self-care practices and the different qualities of different seasons that have really helped me honor what each season has to offer. And that goes into kind of bigger picture of some of the work that I do now with Radiant Living Institute, which is each season of our life holds different lessons for us, different routines for us to feel our best, even through those really hard seasons. They all carry something for us to learn and to grow into. And I think in today's, and sorry, I know I'm just going on and on. I can just go on and on about this stuff.
Keep talking. This is great.
But, I think that in our culture, there's this almost perception that self-care should look a certain way, or our daily routines should look the same way every single day of the year, right? And that's not the case. Like, we are affected by the weather. We are affected by seasons. We are affected by what we're going through in our life. I lead a group coaching circle for women, for female startup founders, solopreneurs, and small business owners. And this is just a great example. We had a session just yesterday, and one of the members of the group, she's a mom of four young boys. And so she says, she said, she was like, I just have to accept that my self care looks different than it does for perhaps someone else, right?
Mhm.
I am making time to stretch every day, but while I'm stretching, my four boys are climbing all over me, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so just knowing that there is that season of life, and then there's also another season of life, right? Where maybe the kids are older, are grown, and you're leaving the house to go to a yoga class, and that's part of your self-care, right? So like all these different seasons of our lives, just I feel like and truly believe have different things to offer us and different things for us to learn, and our daily activities, our routines, in other words, what we're doing on a consistent basis to help us feel our best, or to help us manage stress, or to cope with stress or anxiety in our life, just the daily stressors, right? Not to mention kind of the other stuff that come up on top of that, right? Things like divorces
Mhm.
or new health diagnoses, or career burnout, or whatever it may be, or the loss of a loved one, right? And you add that on top of it too. I mean, that you know adds to those, you know continuing with that analogy of seasons, right? That seasonal effect, right? And so what we're doing to feel our best in that situation is going to look different. And what it means to feel our best in that situation also looks different, right? So maybe when
Sure.
you're in a period of grieving, right? What it means to feel your best isn't that you're smiling and laughing all day, right? I mean, it's not this idea of toxic positivity, but accepting where we are in the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't want to bottle up your emotions, right? Or give the perception of a false emotion that you're not feeling. Like that's just it's not healthy for you. It's unfair to the people that are around you. To they're going to pick up on that energy anyway. Like if
Right.
there's always like that best friend that's always like something going on. Like they can always just kind of feel those wavelengths. If I'm hearing you correctly, then it is there a way with Ayurveda or there's kind of the thought process, the different seasons of your life, whether that's having a child, going through a divorce, an illness, something like that, can kind of coincide with the four, I guess, physical seasons, and that there's different ways to handle what's going on in your life based on the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, definitely Ayurveda has, in terms of thinking about the physical seasons of the year,
Mm-hmm.
each season is characterized by some different qualities. Those qualities in Sanskrit is called gunas. But these qualities are qualities that exist within nature and that also exist within us. And Ayurveda, one of the core tenets of Ayurveda is that we as individuals are a microcosm of the macrocosm of nature herself. In other words, everything that exists within nature also exists within us. And it's all just energies, essentially.
Yep.
Energies, elements, and qualities. And these are just kind of like the building blocks. And so we are affected by that. And so that being said, there are things that we can do in our daily life to help find alignment through those changing seasons, so that we can kind of flow through those a bit more easily or gracefully. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can give you an example. So prior to transitioning full time to the work that I'm doing now with Radiant Living Institute, with my coaching, speaking, as well as my podcast, I was working as a pediatrician.
Mm-hmm.
And so in pediatrics, I definitely saw an increase in symptoms of constipation in children in the fall.
Okay.
Um,
Interesting.
yes, and there's a reason for that, right? And so as I learned, now I didn't learn this in Western allopathic medical school, right? But taking what I knew from my training as a allopathic physician and what I also learned through studying Ayurveda, I was able to kind of make this connection, right? I definitely saw an increasing proportion of kids coming in. Constipation is a very common sort of pediatric diagnosis and issue that a lot of kids deal with, but definitely a lot more in the fall. And according to Ayurveda, fall is characterized by an increase in the elements of air and ether. That's something that we call the Vata dosha. So there's 5 elements that we talk about in Ayurveda: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And so the different seasons have different compositions of these 5 elements. And so in the fall, air and ether is more prevalent. Air and ether has these qualities that I mentioned, these gunas, right? And so these gunas, these qualities of air and ether, it's very light, it's very subtle, it's very mobile, it's very dry, right? Like if you think of like almost like a cool breeze, or you think about in the fall, right? Like the leaves kind of dry up and the leaves fall from the trees, right?
Sure. Yep.
And so there's this dryness that goes on, right? Well, that also goes on in our body, which then relates to what I was started about before, of seeing in pediatrics an increased prevalence of constipation in the fall. Now,
There's not a
I have
flow.
exactly. And there's dryness. There's dryness in the GI tract, right?
Yep.
Right. And so we need to add more moisture there. Right. And so now I have not, admittedly, I have not looked up studies to see if anyone has studied if there truly is an increased incidence of constipation in kids in the fall. But this is definitely from, 16 years of me practicing as a pediatrician, a trend that I've noticed, combined with my knowledge of Ayurveda. So, but that's just an example that I can give you of sort of how our physical bodies are affected by the physical seasons, right? Now, you can take that as almost an analogy to what we were talking about before about also different life situations, right? And something that I see, and this understanding of Ayurveda and the seasons has given me so much self-compassion for myself and within my own life, which I'm now also able to impart to the clients that I work with to help them find compassion for themselves through various seasons in their own life. Because what also happens, and I see this in so many clients that I work with, I myself have faced this as well, right? You're going through a really tough period in your life, and it's like, why do I not feel as alert as I usually do when I'm not going through this divorce?
Yeah.
Why am I not still able to, go to work, exercise like I usually do, do all the things at this like 110% level of performance as I usually do when I'm not going through a divorce, but hey, now I'm going through a divorce.
Yeah. And so
Right?
people will say like, this is a cloud hanging over me.
Yeah.
And
Or
so
like
what
there's
you're talking
something.
about.
Yeah. Or is there something wrong with me? Why am I not able to do this? Right. And it's like, no, it's like having compassion for the fact that like you're going through, I'm just going to continue on this example of divorce. You're going through one of the top 3 stressors in life. Yeah. So there are
100%.
standardized stress scales that exist that list like the top stressors in one's life, right? Top of the list is like loss of a loved one and divorce. Like those are in the top 3, right? And so no, like it's okay that you're not able to do all of the things to maximum capacity as you would when you aren't going through this season of your life, right?
Yeah, it would almost be weird if you were okay and you were still 110% while going through that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so being able to kind of find that compassion and adjust what our expectations for ourselves are, what those definitions of what success looks like during this season of your life, or what happiness looks like, or contentment looks like in this season of your life.
That makes a ton of sense. When you were first talking about how the physical seasons can affect like the seasons of your life, my first thought was like, you mentioned rain and the water, like spring, maybe that's like a cleansing. Winter, maybe that's like a hunker down and kind of enjoy what you have because, it's cold outside. I know you're in Virginia. I don't think you get as much snow as I get in Iowa, but like when we get a foot of snow in Iowa, like that's what you want to do. You want to just cozy up by the fire and be around your loved ones. And I could totally see how the seasons, again, don't necessarily affect your mood, but affect how you handle your day to day, like imagine going through a divorce in the winter versus going through a divorce in the spring. I'm sure that those would be handled 2 separate ways, or your body and your flow is going to be 2 different ways just because of the type of season. Hopefully you don't go through a divorce in the fall and you have constipation. That's a whole mess.
That's just like adding more to the fire, right?
That's even a bigger mess.
That's just what's going to send it right over the edge right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's funny. Earlier, you mentioned pediatrics, so I know that you've been out on the East Coast, right? You're at Eastern Virginia, then University of Virginia. What steered you into the world of pediatrics? I'm just curious because knowing what you do today and everything that I see on LinkedIn and online about the great work that you're doing now, when I read that you're in pediatrics, I was like, oh, I was that was kind of out of left field. What got you there?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah. Um, that's interesting to hear, actually, because obviously I've been living it. So for me, I'm like, oh, this is a natural trajectory, so it's
Yeah,
interesting to get
yeah.
that perspective. But, for pediatrics, so a couple of things. One is I always knew I wanted to work with kids. That's just something that I've had since I myself was very young.
Hmm.
So there was that sort of natural draw to working with and impacting and influencing um, children at that stage in their life trajectory.
Hmm.
Right. A big part of that, though, is that there's so much you can do with prevention in pediatrics. There's so much you can do with prevention, right? You are literally, these are in the formative years of a child, right? Um, you are through working with the child, you're also working with the whole family,
Fair.
right? You're
Yeah.
working with the entire family, right? There's so many things that involve um, the entire family unit that affects the child. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's fair
what's
perspective.
really interesting too is through promoting healthier habits for the children, right? Parents and adults, in general, adults, our habits are pretty well formed, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, trying to have an adult kind of change their habits, I mean, it can happen. And that's a lot of the work that I'm doing right now through my coaching. Um, but in terms of in the medical field, there was something about where promoting these healthy habits in children and educating their families about that, it ended up actually influencing the entire family, right? To maybe
Hmm.
make some changes in healthier ways because all of a sudden there's that extra motivation for the parents of like, oh, this is the best thing for my child too, right? So it's in that way has the potential to positively influence the parents, the other children, right? Like the entire family unit. And so that's what really drew me to pediatrics is just that entire potential, the prevention that goes into that, the entire potential to impact families as a whole as well
Yeah.
through that. Now, through that, I was also, obviously working with a lot of parents, a lot of moms. I've always had an interest, yes, in working and impacting children as well as women. So women and children, that's just always been and again, I don't know where that came from. That's just something innate that has been with me, that an interest to help and provide support in those areas. And so just a very natural tradition of my professional experiences there combined with personal experiences that I've gone through to transition to Radiant Living Institute, where I really focus on working with women. So I always say I don't work exclusively with women, but I do certainly focus on working with women in a lot of my offerings to help them navigate major life stressors, to help them navigate major life transitions, to really show up as their best selves. Because when we're taking care of ourselves in these ways, when we are learning the ways that we can perform, live, at our optimal state, right? And I don't mean just performance and productivity. Yes, that will be positively impacted through this work as well. But I also mean some of those intangibles:
Yeah.
happiness, sense of fulfillment, sense of contentment, sense of inner peace, being able to sleep well without being anxiety ridden all night, right? These sort of intangibles that affect your daily life, um, these are a lot of the things that the work I do impacts now. And so when we, as again, all individuals, again, specifically, I do focus my work on working with women, but really all individuals, when we focus on these aspects, these allow us to show up as our best selves for our family, for our careers, for our businesses, whatever it may be, right? So in that sense, it was just a kind of a natural trajectory because these core uh, concepts have just always been in there, kind of finding the best way to manifest them and create that impact.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is that you knew that you had that innate feeling like I want to help children, and that's what led you down. I mean, residency with pediatrics. That's where you felt happy. That's where you found joy. That's where you found you're bringing a lot of value. But then in helping the parents and specifically moms, like you found joy in that as well. Like, hey, I mean, obviously I like helping the health of a child, but like I really enjoy the teaching and the coaching and the growth in my interactions with the mothers and the parents and really the whole family unit, like you talked about. So it's interesting that I got to imagine there's a lot of pediatricians out there that probably get that same joy, but they're like, well, I went to school to be a pediatrician. I'll stick it out and be a pediatrician. So I love that you identified that joy that you got in coaching, and providing that education and value to older folks, right? Not just kids, and then turning it into transitioning your career in the same sense. Was there like a pivotal moment that I think where you kind of looked in the mirror and said, "Hey, I'm going to take a step back from pediatrics specifically and move into this coaching"? Was there like that pivotal moment or event that really stands out to you that you said, "I'm going to do this"?
Yes and no. So
The perfect answer.
yes and no. So I mean, another thing I want to I will certainly answer that question, but another thing that I wanted to just mention that's really interesting as well is in pediatrics, or in a Western allopathic medical clinical setting. Really, just the way the healthcare system is set up, we're really focused on the physical, right? The physical symptoms, the physical body. Really exclusively, right? Unless you are a mental health provider, a psychiatrist or a psychologist, right? So what I really love and what I found was missing is really being able to, and certainly I did it to the best that I could given the time I had with patients, right? But just with the way that the healthcare system is currently set up, we do have limited time with the patients. Again, whether as physicians we want that or not, most of us do want more time actually with our patients. But just because of the way it's set up, and because of the way just different expectations as well set up in the current medical system between patients and physicians, it really focuses on that physical, right? Now, with the coaching, what I really love is that I can also go deeper into the emotional and mental. And so with the coaching, what I do, I never say, because it is separate from a medical practice. So I never say that I'm treating any medical or physical conditions, right? But what undoubtedly happens is that women come to me to work with these, through these major transitions, major life stressors. Undoubtedly, many of them are also experiencing some sort of physical symptom. Again, I'm not addressing those, right? I'm addressing kind of the mental, emotional, relational, mind body connection, that sort of thing, right? Undoubtedly, though, those symptoms typically improve because we're addressing the emotional mental layers. So that's just really fascinating and interesting for me as well. But to go back to your previous question about whether or not there really was a pivotal moment. Um and I said yes or no, right? Because it's just one of those things where life is always sort of preparing you for the next step. So I actually started practicing yoga my first semester of medical school. This was 22 years ago now, that I started practicing yoga. And so that was the first time that I experienced a sense of peace within myself that I had never experienced before. And I was hooked. And that was also the first time that I heard about something called Ayurveda, which we talked about, which we've talked about in this conversation so far. And these seeds were planted. And I knew from the first semester of medical school that I wanted to learn more about yoga and Ayurveda. I even wrote on a little scrap sheet of paper my very first semester of medical school. I was 21 years old. I wrote on this little sheet of paper, East meets West medicine. So there was this seed that was there from the time that I started my journey of learning how to be a healer, right? And so that's exactly what I did. So I completed medical school. I completed residency. While I was working my first attending job out of residency, I did a yoga teacher training program and I started taking Ayurveda workshops. And as I was learning more, I was continuing to integrate these tools and these practices into my own life. And I was just seeing the profound impact that they had on my own life. And combining this information that I was learning with what I had already learned through medical school about the physical body, about, mental wellness, like all of these things, it all just made so much sense and it all just tied together. But then really using it and implementing it into my own life through my own experiences of career burnout multiple times, through my own experiences of navigating divorce, navigating, various relationship challenges, navigating moves to new cities, new jobs, things like that, right? Like a lot of life transitions within my own personal journey. It really became so clear how powerful these tools were. And I went on not only a professional exploration of all these different tools and modalities of self care and well being, but I went on a very personal exploration as well. And so that's what now through this work, I get to bring all of that together.
For sure. I love that you called it a tool, right? That you can use yoga and Ayurveda as a tool. So, what is it about these disciplines? I mean, I know because we talked offline beforehand that I do yoga as well. So, what about these disciplines creates a space where your students can grow? I could say students, they're adults. It sounds weird saying that, but what about these disciplines? Creates a space where your students can grow and create that mental balance that they're needing for whatever season of life that they're in that they come to you.
Yeah, yeah. So, goodness, there's so much, honestly. And really I draw from um so yes, I do see these as tools. I mean, for me personally, it has become a yoga and Ayurveda. Yoga, I mean, by what I mean by yoga is like the philosophy and lifestyle around yoga, which is also Ayurveda. Um, for me is very much has become a way of life, but that's because I've over the past 2 decades been able to really integrate it into my daily life, so such that it's just a part of life for me. But in terms of me working with clients, I really do see these as tools, and I really do draw from a number of tools. So I draw from things like gratitude practice, positive psychology, journaling, spending time in nature, right? And so there's really a big toolbox that I have created and that I draw from when I'm working with clients. And when I'm working with clients, what I do is I really lead them to the tools that are going to best suit them. So, for example, I don't think that everyone needs to do yoga. Even though I'm a big proponent of yoga, even though I'm a yoga instructor, right? I don't think that everyone needs to do yoga. Now, what I do think, and what is a core principle in my coaching curriculum, is what I call mindful movement. So I do think that movement is very powerful and very important for many reasons. One reason that I think movement is so powerful and important for many reasons is that um, one reason being that it's a way to process emotions. We know that from, a whole body of trauma research that if we don't process emotions, they do get stuck in our body. So if we just shove them down, numb them out, and try to pretend that they're not there, not only will those emotions come up at some point in our life, whether we want them to or not, but they also do tend to get stuck in our body, and that can also lead to physical symptoms. And again, there's a whole body of trauma research about this. And we know that movement is a way to process and release some of those emotions. And so, movement, I do think is really important. It's also when you add in that element of mindfulness, right? Of being fully present and aware while you are moving, right? When you add in that element, it also helps you um, we just cultivate that mind body connection, which can then also help with, we know that a lot of mind body practices, so mindful movement, mind body practices, can really help with your physiological stress response, right? So we know that they can also actually help rewire your neurophysiology and your stress response, helping you to become less reactive, helping you to um, see things that maybe at one point in your life would normally you would see as a very big stressor, right? You may not react as strongly to those anymore, right? You may be able to even if you do have a strong reaction, you may be able to incorporate these tools to kind of pause and transition from that strong reaction into a more sort of parasympathetic activated state, which is when your body senses safety, and we're able to think more clearly when our body senses safety to come up with solutions and to respond intentionally to situations as opposed to react more impulsively through that sympathetic fight or flight activation response.
Absolutely. And I think for listeners who haven't practiced yoga, who haven't done that type of thing, one thing that we always think about while we're in yoga practice or even throughout your day is the breath, right? Like you're always breathing. It's always inhale, it's exhale. If you feel yourself, getting tight as you're in a certain pose, let it out loud. Like our instructors always say, like, exhale loudly. It's okay.
Yeah.
But then there's always kind of that thought of like, man, you're just exhaling the bad things that are in your mind, the things that are keeping you wound up tight, that are forcing you to not quite get the movement in your body for that position, is because there's thoughts in your head and there's things that are going on in your life that are tightening you up. And so like sometimes those big exhales feel so good, and it's the
Oh, yeah.
simplest thing that you can do. So
Absolutely,
um,
absolutely. And the power is in that exhale. So your
mm-hmm,
inhale is related to to sympathetic nervous system activation, right? To
mm-hmm,
that fight or flight kind of activating response. Your exhale is related to parasympathetic nervous system activation,
the
right?
comfort.
So exactly, exactly. So your exhale is what triggers that sort of rest and digest sense of safety within your nervous system, within your body, right? It triggers that physiological response. So, yes. So, it's funny because we always say when you're like stressed or anxious, take 3 big deep breaths, right? Why that helps is not because you're inhaling 3 big deep breaths. Why it
Mm-hmm.
helps is because when you're breathing in deeper, chances are you're breathing out longer as well. It's that extended exhale that helps the most.
It's very interesting. And three, I think, is something, it could just be a random number, but also it's just more to get your mind to think, okay, I have a task that has 3 steps, and to slow down and do it one by one, not just
Exactly.
inhale once, exhale, and then you're done. It's like, well, that was easy. I do that every day. But like to actually think about 3 inhales and exhales really slows
Exactly.
down your mind.
And it gives your mind something to focus on other
Sure.
than the thoughts that are
The
already
thing.
running around in your mind. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, it's funny because I also teach meditation, and the biggest obstacle, the biggest myth I hear about meditation, I often hear people say, I can't meditate because anytime I sit down to, my mind just keeps racing. I can't shut it off, right? And they just say, I'm a terrible meditator. I can't do it. But that's the biggest myth. Here's the thing, as humans, that's what our mind does. It's just what the mind does, right? Every single one of us, right? Meditation is a practice of focus and concentration. So it's a practice, first of all. No one gets it perfectly. It's a practice.
Mhm.
No matter how long you've been practicing it, it's still a practice. And it's a practice of focus and concentration. So you're focusing on something that you have predetermined you're going to focus on for that period of time, right? So when I say kind of like mindful movement, or you go to a yoga practice, right? Like the example you just gave me, as well. Like if you're in a yoga class, you had mentioned that you do hot yoga, and it's hot yoga sculpts, like with weights too,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So your mind is constantly, and you're hearing the instructor's instructions, right, and guidance that's just continually reminding you that, hey, I'm focusing on my physical body, I'm focusing on this movement that I'm doing in this moment, right? And so that in a way then becomes a meditation. So anytime other thoughts come into your mind, it's like, wait, but what am I doing? I'm doing this lunge. I'm doing this warrior 2 pose, right? Um, count this 3 breaths that you just said, right? When you're counting to 3, it's giving your mind something else to focus on, right?
Yep.
And that in itself is so powerful. It just kind of gets you out of that sort of running dialogue that's always going on, right? And so
Yeah.
again, that's where that can be so powerful, and it's a form of meditation. It really is.
Hey, D&D podcast family. I want to take a quick break in this episode to share a little behind the scenes of why the Doctors and Dollars podcast and our Wealth Wednesday series were made and why they're important. We have a number of physicians in our Grand Vision family office, and through conversations with them, we realize there is a huge void in financial education for physicians. We don't have time to personally work with every doctor out there. So the podcast is a way for us to offer a resource where you can learn about physician focused wealth strategies via Wealth Wednesday, while also learning from other doctors making a splash in the medical community via Doctors and Dollars. Providing value is our top priority. And if there's a specific question or topic that you want to hear about, just reach out to us on any social media platform or go to the Doctors and Dollars website, which is ddpod.com. Also, if you'd like to take your wealth plan to the next level and be a part of a community of money minded physicians in our family office, we open applications just twice per year. You can explore and get more details about the next application period at grandvision.co. Now, back to the show. Have you always had a passion for speaking and educating others, even before you were Dr. Ajmani? You were just Sheetal, right? And wherever it is that you grew up, like, did you always have were you always very well spoken and like communicating with others, or was this kind of a skill that you picked up from yoga and from getting into coaching? Tell me about that.
I've always loved it. I have this. I wish I had a VCR, because I have this. Gosh, I'm really dating myself here.
I know VCRs too, right?
It's like start talking about like 8-track machines, but no, I have this VHS tape. I still have it at my childhood home of when I was in 6th grade doing an interview for like the school news show or something,
Sure.
right? And growing up within the Indian community, we would have different like cultural performance, like cultural evenings where, the kids growing up would do cultural performances, and typically these were like dances or singing. Um, I did do some cultural dances at that time, but also there were many years that I gave a speech about the holiday.
Nice.
Like I prepared a speech about the holiday, describing the cultural significance of it and the history and the mythology around it. This was as like a 5th or 6th grader, right? And so,
Yeah.
so it's definitely always been there.
You get up on stage, you're like, "Here comes that Ajmani girl. All right, let's hear this speech." That's good though. Those are the people that let's say you weren't that girl, right? You were the one that enjoyed dance, and you went to that, and you were planning to do a dance routine, and you saw another girl that was going to get up and speak. That's where you look and you're like, oh, man, like, why are they? That's so weird, right? Like as a kid, weird was the word you always like. That's so weird. But now looking at as an adult, looking at a kid like that, I'm like, that kid's going to go somewhere. Like that's going to be someone who's successful because they're doing a speech, about the holiday versus versus a dance routine. So kudos to you for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're just I don't know. I just get that vibe from you. Like you're just very well spoken. You know how to find what people need to feel better about themselves. Like mindfulness, I think, is a big word that you use.
Mm-hmm.
My next question is around the other phrase that I mentioned in the bio at the beginning is living radiantly. And obviously, you have Radiant Living Institute now. That you started a few years ago. Like where did radiant living or living radiantly, however you want to phrase either one, where did that come from? Like was that just a thought one night and you said, hey, this is it?
Um, it didn't come like that, but it came through actually quite honestly. I was working with a business coach at the time. So for years, so I had started while I was practicing medicine, I had started with teaching yoga at yoga studios when I wasn't practicing medicine, offering Ayurveda consultations, and doing a lot of this work. But I felt like I was like practicing medicine here, teaching yoga here, offering Ayurveda consultations here. I knew, and I thought upon it, and I sat with it for such a long time that like there's got to be a way for me to bring all these skills together in some
East and
way.
West, bring the
Yeah,
East and
like
West
there's
together.
got
Yeah.
to be a way, right? Like they're all, it just makes sense. They're all complementary. They all make sense, right? And so by that point, when I had started when I had started doing all this, I didn't know that business coaches existed. It wasn't as common as it is now, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, because like I said, these seeds were planted 22 years ago. So when I started diving into all of this in terms of how can I actually start offering this to folks, I didn't really know anyone else doing this sort of work.
Yeah.
I didn't, social media existed, but it was not as big as it was now. I didn't know any physicians doing this type of work or stepping away from clinical practice to do this type of work. Or, I started out with going part-time before I transitioned full-time to doing this. And so, but when I started, I didn't know anyone else doing it. So I was just really navigating this path completely on my own. And so a few years of doing that, a few years of trying different things out in that way, I then started working with a business coach who was actually a really good friend of mine. And I came to her and I was like, look, this is like all of my ideas. And let me tell you, I think to this day, I'm still the person who has come to her with the most ideas and programs, and like these are all of my interests and these are all of my skills and expertise and things that I like to speak on. And we spent, honestly, months going through that, and really honing it down, like, okay, these are all, and that's when we really came to see, and it was through working with her that I came to realize that all of these are different tools. But really, what I'm passionate about is working with women, helping them navigate major life stressors and major life transitions. And really, ultimately, truly, the work that I'm doing is guiding them to start to tune into their own inner voice, to start to trust their inner voice again, because so much of the stress that we experience in life, so much of the physical symptoms that come up that are related to stress, so much of that comes up from us not living in alignment with what our true nature actually desires. And so we feel that discord and that distress in life. So ultimately, I don't start off that way, but that's where we get to truly when I'm working with clients, is how to start to tune into your own inner voice, how to start to trust her. I'm using her, but whoever I'm working
Sure.
with, how to
Yeah.
start to trust your inner voice and how to then build your life from that point. So, why that comes to radiant living, right? A radiant life really starts from within. So really the journey I guide people on is really starts from within, right? We need to start to tap into ourselves to really see what is really important to us, and am I really living my life in accordance to that? And if not, okay, now let me look at how I can, perhaps adjust some of the external aspects of my life, whether that has to do with my career, my daily habits, my daily routines, my relationships, to actually reflect who I am and what
Yeah.
my inner voice is telling me. Because truly, that greatest amount of discord or distress is when we're not living in that alignment.
Absolutely. Man, I have like 5 questions I could ask to that because that's very interesting. Like, without giving too much away, because I want someone who sees this or listens to this and says, "Hey, I want to go work with Dr. Ajmani. Like, this is great." I certainly want them to pay you to do so. But like, what does session number 1 feel like compared to session number 10? Because obviously, I mean, you got to start, to your point, radiant. From the inside outside, you got to be very introspective, right? You really have to look in and be honest with yourself. But then as you start to find that and you listen to that voice inside of your head, what does that progression look like? Because what does the teaching say, as you get to session 10? Okay, we've really looked inside. We've been honest. Uh, we know we haven't been honest with ourselves in the past, or we haven't listened, to that inner voice. What next then?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question.
That's when you
So,
take over the world, right?
so, well, and that's the thing, I always tell people, like, I'm not here to tell you what living radiantly should look like for you. Like, but I
Mhm.
will help you figure out what that looks like for you, you
Mhm.
know? But I do know it starts from within. It starts from within yourself, right? And so, I have created a 6-step curriculum. So that is where I recommend everyone start with, like, right? Like all of my clients, starting through with walking them through those 6 steps. And for anyone listening, and I'll mention this again after I go through the 6 steps, but I do have a free workbook that you can download from my website, radiantlivinginstitute.com. It's a free workbook, and it gives you kind of an overview of these 6 steps and a starting point too. So that's a great place to get started. But these 6 steps I came up with through looking back at my own journey of navigating major life transitions, as well as clients that I had worked with. And I came up with this a few years ago. And I really pulled out the most powerful steps that really held true in each of those journeys, and that are also talked about in Western science and also talked about in these 5,000-year-old Eastern traditions as well. So these are like the most powerful pieces that I have pulled out. Um,
Yep.
and so that journey, those 6 steps, that journey starts with, I call it, there's like 3 phases and 6 steps. So 3 phases with 2 steps in each. So first it's, and I call it the CAR method. So where
Car
C,
method. Yeah, yeah.
CAR, so C stands for clarity, A stands for acceptance, and R stands for rebuilding. So first we work on getting clarity. Then we work on acceptance. And acceptance isn't just like throwing your hands up in the air, like, well, I guess this is just what life is like, right? Acceptance is about grounding yourself in the present moment, because we can only make any transformation or change through being in the present moment, right?
Absolutely.
That's where some of that mindful movement practices come in, and the mind body connection. Because one thing that I've been saying a lot lately in some of the meditations I've been teaching is that your mind often lives in the past or the future. Your body can be nowhere else but the present moment. So when we focus on the body, like we were talking about earlier with like yoga class, right? And you're constantly, the instructor is reminding you to focus on your breath, focus on your body, because that is always here in the present moment.
Hmm.
It's never in the past or the future. Your mind is always in the past or the future, almost always, right? But your
Hmm.
body is here in the moment. And so that's that acceptance piece. And then R is rebuilding. So that's when we start to look at the external, right? Career, relationships, setting boundaries, that sort of thing. So the 2 steps within each of those phases, clarity, I walk clients through a process of what I call taking inventory. It's really looking at kind of, what does my life look like now? What does my ideal version of life look like? Now, sometimes when you're in a lot of times when you're in the middle of a big transition, it can be really hard to think about what does my ideal life look like, because it can often feel like your whole world just got flipped upside down, right? So that's fine. I encourage clients, I guide them through, to have self-compassion through that journey. Like, it's okay to not know all of it. Um, but again, I guide clients through that process of taking inventory. Um, and then I guide them through a process of creating empowering daily routines, right? Because taking inventory is something that you do during kind of like certain periods of time, right? Maybe every few months or once a year or something like that. Um, but empowering daily routines are ways to tap into that clarity within yourself on a daily basis or a regular basis. And so again, I don't tell people, I don't say that everyone has to meditate, but I do say that we all need to connect with ourselves in some way, shape, or form on a regular basis, right? And so that's what I guide clients to, what that looks like for them. Um, and then we go into the acceptance phase, which is dropping into the body. So mindful movement and mindful eating are the 2 steps in there. And then the rebuilding phase, the R, we talk about career and relationships, which is really focused on setting boundaries.
Mm.
Setting boundaries within ourselves, setting boundaries with others, right? Whether professionally or personally. Often many of my clients find, though, that there's boundaries that they need to set within themselves, with like how they deal with certain situations or with some of their daily habits and routines. And then the final step is celebration. So finding ways to celebrate on a regular basis. So often, we focus so much on what we did not achieve or did not get to. But I really think one of the keys to feeling fulfilled is taking those moments to, even if it's in small ways, of writing it down in a journal every evening, just, 3 things you did that you're proud of that day. Or, even if that means it's like I went to the post office, or, I ran the dishwasher. Like, that counts, like so often we focus so much on what we didn't get to that we overlook the things that we did do. And so those are the 6 steps that I guide people through. Again, I do have the workbook that people can download to get started on their own as well, to kind of take a little bit of a closer look into those.
Awesome. And that's at radiantlivinginstitute.com.
Yes.
Perfect. I think the big question for me that comes out of all this is the folks that do come to you and want to work with you. And we talked about, the different life things that happen. I mean, it could be anywhere from burnout, which you said you had experienced as a physician, divorce or a breakup, birth of a child, getting a new job. Could be the end of your career, like you're now an empty nester, and that's super uncomfortable. So there's lots of different scenarios. Are people coming to you at the start of these? Or are these people who have been experiencing it for a while and they're in the trenches of this transition, and they're like, I need someone to pull me out of this trench? When do you most commonly see people are coming to you with the help that they need?
Yeah, I mean, really at any stage, in that process, when they've kind of had that self-awareness that they need to um, rebuild, and are really to kind of start to do some of that inner work with it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
just kind of reached that point where it's like, yeah, I can't do this on
Yeah.
my own. They don't know the
Exactly.
car method, right? They just,
Exactly. And so for each individual, that can be a different phase in it, sort of earlier on, kind of right in the middle. But typically when clients come to me, they have reached this phase of almost, very often, of just feeling like they've lost sort of a part of themselves, like something just
mhm,
doesn't feel right, and that they know that they need some guidance to kind of get back to themselves. And through working with me, um, even just going through, those 6 steps with me, many clients continue to work with me beyond those initial 6 steps, but many clients, even just through going through those 6 steps with me, um, have shared that they really feel like they've rediscovered parts of themselves that they had long forgotten about. And they have a renewed sense of joy, a renewed sense of purpose. A lot of them have made big changes in their relationships, whether that meant needing to end a relationship, or whether that meant just needing to set better boundaries within their relationships. Um, People have restructured their businesses. So many really, I'll be honest. I mean, I created these 6 steps, and honestly, even some of the results that I've seen, I'm like, wow, within
yeah,
6 to 8 weeks. Like, that's
yeah, pat on
incredible.
the
Like,
back.
it's
Yeah.
incredible. It's incredible, and so it really is powerful work.
Yep. That's awesome. Man, that's got to be so gratifying to, I don't know, the feedback that I can imagine that you're getting from a lot of these women that you help has got to feel so good. So that's, I could just tell as you were describing all of that and talking about the steps, like just the smile on your face, like you could just tell it works. It's not just a scheme. It's certainly something that's
Mhm.
changing lives. And I mean, to just do it over 6 to 8 weeks, like you just mentioned, is absolutely incredible. Uh, so I think you may know, obviously, the name of the show is Doctors and Dollars. So you're the doctor, I'm the dollars, right? Type of thing. Financial professional. So as a co-founder of Grand Vision, we work with physicians. That's our kind of our bread and butter, and with physician families within our family office, within private equity and investing and things like that. How much of the work that you do turns financial? I mean, a lot of it is spiritual, mindfulness. It can be personal, it can be career what focus, but how much of it is financial?
In terms of in terms of what I'm guiding clients through.
That, but also how much, not how much, how many, give a percentage, I guess you could say, are people that are coming with you that need a change, and some of the spark is financial related. Either they're not making enough money, or they're in a career that they don't like, that they could be making a lot of money but they're still not happy, or they're looking ahead to the future and they're not happy with where it's going because of the current financial position that they're in. How much of that comes up?
I think it's definitely a fear and a worry and a part of it, but the main in terms of I think that's something that a lot of people, if they're coming to me for, and again, like we mentioned, people come to me with a lot of different life transitions, right? So I do see a lot of clients who are going through empty nest syndrome, and so with them, kind of with that group, I don't hear a lot of kind of this sort of fear around the finance aspect. But certainly, folks who are dealing with career burnout, navigating career transitions, that is something that can sometimes make them feel stuck.
Sure.
That kind of that mindset of feeling stuck that I can't make this change because of, you know. Um, but I would say the major pull for people to come work with me is really how they are feeling, their sense of inner peace, their sense of feeling disconnected to themselves, their sense of feeling that they're just juggling and managing all of the things in life, and kind of like, who am I anymore,
Hmm.
right?
That totally makes sense.
That's really the biggest driving factor, right? Now, obviously, money and finances are an important part of life. And I did an episode on my show recently also about uh, finances recently. And because I think that it's important, it is one of those things that, like, finances and financial security, it affects our sense of safety and security.
Hmm.
Right? And so if we're in a constant state of worrying about our finances, and we're constantly in that sort of sympathetic chronic activation, that chronic physiological stress response, right? Or if we look at it from the yoga perspective, right? That really affects our sense of security and safety in our root chakra,
Hmm.
right? Which is like that base chakra, right? That base energy center, right? And so if we are in that energy center and in that state of fear and survival and scarcity, right, it's going to be really hard to address some of the other aspects.
That totally makes sense. Hey, you mentioned it right there a second ago. So, your podcast, Essential Self Care Podcast, it's for busy people who want that self care, in the midst of all the things going on in life, right? And so, you're sharing real life stories of transformations and insights on you know tools and steps that people can take. Like, what led you to using that medium, the podcast medium, to get your expertise out there?
Mm. That's a great question. Well, it kind of ties back to what you asked me earlier. So I've always enjoyed speaking, right? And
Hmm.
and interviewing. It goes back to that when I was in sixth grade and I was interviewing someone on the school TV show. And so, a few years ago, I kind of tested it out first. I was like playing around with doing like with one of my really good friends. Doing like who's also a physician. We were doing like Instagram lives and Facebook lives and interviews, and I started that way actually many years ago. And I was like, this is kind of fun. I think I'd like to do more of this and do this as a podcast. And so I had the idea for this podcast. Actually, I mentioned it a little bit right before we started recording, actually 2 years before I recorded my first episode. And then, so I had this idea 2 years before I recorded my first episode. And then honestly, in 2022, fall of 2022, I got really burned out practicing pediatrics. And it was at the end of that year that I ended up leaving clinical pediatrics. But there was a day where I was just like, and I had already been talking about self care a lot for years and years and years. And I'd already had the idea of this podcast, but it was just like, this is essential. Like, I was so stressed and so burned out, and I was doing the things that I needed to do to take care of myself. But it was a very hard season of my life.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is essential. And I sat down in my closet, right? I'm in this gorgeous podcast studio now, but my first episode was in my closet in my home because that's the for those of you listening, the reason it's in my closet is because apparently, at least in your home, generally the closet has the best sound, least echo
Yep.
and all of that stuff. So I sat down on the floor in my closet with my laptop. I have my own mic at home, and recorded the first episode.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it was almost more for you to start. Like you needed it at that point in your life, the
I
season
did.
that you were going through. You needed an outlet to be able to speak,
A
right?
hundred
And then it
percent.
yeah, and then it
A
turned
hundred
into
percent.
to something that you're sharing your wisdom and everything that you got going on in your brain to the masses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. But
Absolutely.
therapeutic in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you find how many episodes in were you when you kind of had that realization of like this is exactly what I needed. I needed to be able to have this outlet.
Oh, from the first episode.
Oh,
Um,
right out the gate.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I did that because I needed to create. That first
Mm,
episode, I needed to create. Like I distinctly remember waking up that day and being like, I need to create something. So that's definitely it's a creative outlet for me, which I definitely need. And I think if you ask anyone, I mean, I'd love to know kind of your thoughts on it too. But I think if you ask many people who have a podcast, I mean, definitely I do it for my listeners and I think about kind of what they will find value in, right? But I definitely get so much out of these conversations. Like I just love meeting new people. I love having conversations from people. I love hearing their stories and their journeys. I at least at this stage, I edit and do all the production myself.
mm,
So I edit my own episodes, and honestly, I love being able to just like sit in a room by myself, listen to the episode, and just hear my guests' stories again, Because when you're
hmm
doing the interview, you're kind of thinking about what you're going to ask next and, keeping the conversation going, keeping track of time, like all that stuff. But when I get to, sit at home and edit the show myself, like I get to actually just listen to it. And
Nice.
I love just, learning from my guests and hearing these stories as much as I hope my listeners do.
Yeah, exactly why I did it. I mean, you wanted my insights, but they're kind of the same as yours. This thing was born out of all the physicians that we work with, and you sit down with a married couple and talk about finances and their kids and their goals and their dreams, but some of the stories they have and the path that they've taken to get to where they are, it did not take long from the time that we started Grand Vision as a company to see like this is like these conversations are great. Like we should have a camera and a microphone on us as we're sitting here talking. Whether it's on Zoom, whether it was in person, however we were interacting with those families. And so, yeah, that's why we just because simply because we worked with physicians, that's where Doctors and Dollars was kind of born from. Um, but I find that a lot of the conversations, even this one included, people will listen to this and be like, "Yep, this is just like another episode with Nate." Is like we don't sit here and talk about medicine. We don't talk a lot about the healthcare system and all those things. It's more about the person and their story and where they're going. So much more interesting than talking to a neurosurgeon about a lobotomy or something like that, right? Where it's like they can go on a medical podcast and have that conversation if they want to, but to hear stories and hear their perspective and how it's either different from mine or the same as mine, despite me being in the finance world, them being in the medical world. That's the whole reason I do that, and hopefully that shines through. Because I mean, uh, I got to go start listening to more of your episodes because they're going to uplift. I'm sure they're uplifting for
They
everyone.
are.
Um,
Mhm.
but the stories that you hear from your guests, I'm sure, are just unique, um, but also transformational.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Last question for you:
Mhm.
what does the next 5 years look like for Dr. Ajmani?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know.
Great answer.
Yeah. I don't know. Honestly, life has thrown so many twists and turns.
hmm
And yeah, I and even though I guide my clients through that, like taking inventory and ideal vision, right? And I've done that myself certainly as well. And in fact, so much of what I'm doing day in and day out right now was once a dream.
Yeah.
And so I do have that, but in terms of, kind of setting these concrete visions, I don't know. I like to kind of allow myself to flow. And I think part of that is that so much of my life was planned out for so
Hmm.
long, right? Going into
Yep.
medicine and that just that path so laid out. And then you experience some life, like you get to the end of like that training part that takes you up to like 30,
Yep.
before you get your first real job. And and then you experience some of life and you're like, wow, most of life really doesn't go as you planned it.
For sure.
And I'm kind of in this phase in my life right now where I'm just allowing myself to be guided by things that feel right to me innately, really tuning into my own inner voice, um, that energetically feel right, things that give me joy, like inner joy, not just like an
Hmm.
external joy, but like an inner joy, and just staying open.
That's a beautiful way to say it. I would not have explained it that way. I could definitely tell, like, obviously we're both into yoga, so that you give the same answer that I would give is I don't know, and that's okay. I'm just gonna let it go where it goes, and I've dealt with enough things in the past that I don't need to have it planned out. Like if I were to look back, what I was doing 2 years ago compared to what 1 year ago looked like to today to a year from now, if somebody asked me the question that I just asked you, I would say I don't know, and honestly, I would be okay with that because
Mhm.
like last summer this time, part of Grand Vision, we bought $16 million worth of multifamily real estate. Well, 2 years ago, if you asked me that, I would be like, I don't know how to do that. And so like, and our family office that we have, I knew what a family office was, but I did not know how to guide those people other than what I did as a financial advisor. And so to all of a sudden have a family office and to have all of these physician families with their spouses and their kids, now entrusting us with their financial futures, I wouldn't have guessed that 2 years ago. And so
Mhm.
2 years from now, who knows? I mean, it's
Yeah.
the world is your oyster, as they say.
Yeah. And to
Um,
tell you the truth, a year ago, if you had asked me that question, and if I didn't have a clear cut, planned out answer, I think I would have felt, well, I know I would have felt stressed about that. I would have felt
yeah.
like the world was judging me for not knowing.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's really, part of my show, Essential Self Care, also is that I want to talk about some of the things that we don't talk about enough, but we need to. And I think, normalizing this idea that it's okay to not have a clear 5-year vision, like they talk about so much in business and in the corporate world, like, what's your 5-year vision, like all that stuff. And to like not have that is okay. And so, and I share that because, yeah, it's so ingrained in our culture to have that, like I said, a year ago, if you had asked me that, I would have felt really, and being completely honest and vulnerable, I would have felt self-conscious about it,
For sure.
about
Same.
saying I don't know.
Yep.
But now today, a year later, I've done a lot of growth, a lot of my own personal development, where I do feel comfortable sharing that. And in fact, I would love our listeners, anyone who's listening right now who feels the same way, to know that that's okay.
Totally okay. A very underappreciated movie line from a fantastic movie, Jurassic Park. So my kids love dinosaurs. Life will find a way
Mhm.
is a line in the movie in Jurassic Park 1. I just, however you want to equate that to your own life, but like life will find a way. You will find your way to where you are meant to be.
Mhm.
It's okay not to know the exact path or to have it all scripted out for you.
Mhm.
Um, and you're exactly right. People don't talk about that enough. They get anxious. They get self-deprecating. They get very ashamed. I think is the one word that I would
Mhm.
use that
Yeah.
they don't know where they're going to be. I don't know. I'm like you. I think it's okay. You are where you're meant to be, and you will be where you're meant to be. So, um, very cool thing. Well,
Yeah.
it's been a pleasure. I'm glad we got the time together, and I certainly look forward to when our paths cross again.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed our conversation today.
Absolutely. Take care.